Okay, Jennifer. Self-portraiture has been a mainstay of your practice, but with Toronto Alice, you're using a stylized kind of manga-esque image for the central character. Why?
I think because the last few videos I've worked on, I've been slowly getting away from using a very obvious self-portrait of myself. I think when your practice has been so tied to you personally and had such an autobiographical feel, people do tend to kind of read that into it anyway, and I don't know it. That's not my intent with Toronto Alice to have any kind of personal content, but more and more I've been finding a desire to disappear a little bit from the image itself and be more behind the scenes. So I think there's that aspect of it, a desire to disengage a little bit and let another image, another person, another actor, take that role that I occupied. Also, I think maybe practical concerns that this is the first time that I've ever worked from a found text, right? So previously, all my work's been, my own kind of self-generated mythology. Alice is obviously a known quantity. So it may be a response to that as well.
Okay. Now there's a line in Through the Looking Glass where Humpty Dumpty says to Alice, "So you're exactly like other people."
Okay,
I was thinking perhaps that was why you had decided to use the manga-esque approach to drawing.
Yeah.
Rather than a more realistic approach, which is what you've tended towards in the past.
True. To be honest, when I storyboarded Alice, which is where the character design began, I was very much looking at pop surrealism. So I was looking at artists, specifically Mark Ryden.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, that
there's
kind
a bit
of
of Betty Boop going on there too.
Yes, she's very much. I think of Alice as a combination of. I'm thinking Louise Brooks, so kind of a 1920s flapper with Betty Boop. That kind of. She has the dark hair, the kind of the bob haircut. The characters are to some degree very stylized and kind of retro feel. I think.
How old is your Alice? Because Alice in Through the Looking Glass is 7.5.
Yeah.
And then Alice in Wonderland is 12? How old is your Alice?
She looks 16 to me. What do you think?
Yeah, older. I mean, her body doesn't show any signs of sexuality. Like she has no breasts. She has no sexual characteristics. Although that is in keeping with that kind of pop surrealism in the Mark Ryden way of rendering, or even Ray Caesar is another one that comes to mind. That kind of, for lack of a better word, sort of a nymphette. It's this kind of
ingenue.
Yeah, maybe sexualized sort of young girl, but my Alice is sort of, she's older obviously than a very young child, but I don't think of her as being a teenager.
So she's old enough to go on the streetcar by herself.
Yeah, so let's say anywhere between 10 and 12 is sort of how I see her.
And thinking about the streetcar, why Toronto? Why specifically Toronto?
The impetus for the series began while I was working on the previous film, and I was taking the streetcar to the studio that I had on St. Clair West. And I happened to be reading Alice. I was reading it to my kids. I was reading. I have a very dog-eared, the two Alice books.
Penguin edition. Yeah?
I think it is
that's
actually.
What I have. I
think
read it last week.
It's the pages are all yellowed and dog-eared, and that's what I'd been reading to them. And I think just as having one of those moments on the streetcar where you have a strange conversation with some random person. I think you have those a lot on the streetcar, and I think I just had this thought in my head about how traveling on the public transit in the city was a lot like meeting these very strange, eccentric characters that populate.
Tweedledee and Tweedledum with their coats done right up and everything. So
Yes.
I have sat beside people like that on the streetcar.
Exactly. So there's a kind of commonality, and I wanted to take this known text, but then situate it in something that felt familiar and comfortable, and something that I knew. And so the scenes, like when you see Alice standing waiting for the streetcar, and then all of the landscape that goes by, is all shot just up the street. I walked down the street with my camera and just shot all of the houses that I could see along the curb. I had to do a lot of Photoshop, so there's not any cars in there. And so it looks like, our Alice lives in a kind of middle class 1920s style suburb in, the kind of this part of Toronto, this East End Toronto. And so I think I just wanted to anchor it in something that I knew.
Okay.
That makes sense.
But it is a surrealistic approach, that you're taking.
I was going to say that your previous work, Domesticia, that's what you said, a couple of them, they're not self-portraits, just to reinforce the point you were saying, isn't that?
Yes.
Like Madeleine.
Yes, she's another character that I just developed, who is, a kind of 19th century heroine, almost like the kind of heroine you'd expect to see in early silent films. I mean, silent film was the style, and also I was very consciously thinking of early animation, since the paper cutout, which is what I use, is, I think, the very first form of animation, other than, the zoetropes and those kind of animations where they would draw and, do it in a wheel, that kind of, but actual film animation. The cutout and the articulated paper puppet is, 19th century, early 20th century. So it is of that vintage. And yes, and Madeleine is, she's this kind of generic silent film heroine.
There's no relationship with Poe in the House of Usher, I guess?
I not specifically, but now that I think about it, Madeleine is character in Fall of the House of Usher, but
that's a pretty
yes
creepy house.
It is. It is very much so. Yeah. Well, and the octopus is, you make an argument that I'm sort of referencing H.P. Lovecraft. The more so than that, and there's a hint on the wall when you first see the room, and there's a camera pan, and you can see one of the artworks that are on the wall in Madeleine's studio is a Hokusai, I want to say his name is. So he is a Edo period Japanese woodcut artist. Worked in the
guy that did the big wave?
Yes,
yeah, okay.
Very famous. And there's an image that in the West is known as the Dream of the Fisherman's Wife, and it's a shunga, which is the pornographic art of the time period.
I've seen that. You have it on your blog, haven't you?
Yes, I have written on it, and it's actually an image of a woman from Japanese legend called Tamatori, who was a abalone diver, and she apparently goes into the Dragon King's lair and steals a pearl and hides it in her breast. Like, she cuts a slit in her breast and hides it in there. And the Dragon King realizes this and pursues her and has his minions, who are octopi and such, to chase her down. And apparently when they catch up with her, they have some sexy time. And it's a very famous example of what later became called Uro-Goro.
I remember reading that in your site.
Yes.
I was unaware of that completely.
Yes.
Which means something like bizarre.
Erotic, grotesque nonsense.
That's right. That's
which developed a little bit later in the 1920s and 30s in Japan. So, which is also this is all a meeting place of my various passions and interests, and that period of Japanese art very much inspires that series, and I think in future series as well. I'm going to go back to that subject matter.
Oh, okay. And that's sort of in this environment of your disobedient dollhouse. And to loop it right back around, there's a picture of Alice talking with the rabbit hanging in the parlor, as I recall.
Yes. That image actually isn't Alice, though I could see you would think that, but it's actually a Victorian Easter card. It was like I cut out the text, but below it said Happy Easter. So
Oh,
it was
okay.
just, like their version of a Hallmark card from the 19th century. And I mean, the Victorians were big fans of these kind of anthropomorphic, animals dressed up in clothing. And so we have this strange image of, a lady dressed up and the kneeling rabbit in his waistcoat, presumably courting her in some kind of strange romantic relationship, which you just don't understand. And it just, when I saw the image, I thought, well, I have to put this in my house, because it got at that kind of creepy, underneath sexual overtones, creepy cute kind of aesthetic. And really, even in starting from the dollhouse and going forward, there's less of it in Alice, but certainly in the first few videos that I did, there is that element of the erotic grotesque. And I think that's why I'm so attracted to it in the Japanese art. And that itself even grew out of my interest in the Gothic, sort of big G Gothic art, which also will have elements, not so much as sexualized, but certainly it's this combination of the sensual and the aesthetic with subject matters or ideas of decay and rot and death and transgression.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your process, because we've touched on the house, we've talked a little bit about Alice and a little bit about Domestica videos. But let's talk about your process, because when I met you, you were drawing, and then you started printmaking, and that was stone lithography.
I started with copperplate etching.
Okay.
Was my first love in terms of printmaking. When I went back to school to do my master's, that's when I started doing stone lithography, and that's what I did the dollhouse in. But it all started with etching initially, and I still periodically do that as well. And so the printmaking, it all starts with the drawing, and it always goes back to drawing. I mean, what I'm still doing is drawing, but when I moved into printmaking, the idea was it was an expansion of what I can make drawing do. Because you do one drawing on a piece of paper and you're like, okay, that's very nice.
Actually, that's superb.
Well, thank
really
you.
good drawing, yeah.
But you get to a point just in terms of what you can do with the medium, and I felt like, okay, but let's see what else it can do. And then you move into being able to do multiples with printmaking, right? And playing with the image, and I could do a drawing on a plate, print it out, and then, maybe do an addition, and then I could go back, revisit the plate, erase some material, add other material, try new inks, try different colors, different kinds of paper. And so it opens up these kind of playful possibilities as, well, okay, let's rework that image and see what else we push it. And then, and that kind of culminated in the dollhouse, right? Where almost, not all, but about 90% of the images you see there are original prints done with stone lithography. And then the animation literally grew out of a colleague of mine in grad school looking at the dollhouse and saying, gee, Jen, I can really see this being an animation, like looking at the different rooms and all of the narratives that play out in the rooms, and saying, I'd really like to see them animated. And I'm like, yeah, you know what, I would too. And literally I just went home, went on Amazon, I think I bought a animation for dummies kind of book, and started taking classes, workshops locally, literally just figured it out. And then I met animators working in Toronto, and everyone's been, just like in the print community, I find the animation community, they love the art form, and they're so open and willing to share tips and tricks and techniques, and how can I do this, and how can I achieve that. And and I that's where I am now. So it's taking that printmaking image, and now we're expanding it out to time-based. And okay, now let's play out those drawings, over time, and literally see things come to life.
Steve had an interesting observation about your line in your drawings.
Oh, yeah, that's the St. Ursula ones, and quite a ways back.
Yes. Yeah.
There's really, really dark outlines on the figures separating them from the ground.
Yeah.
And they don't do what lines usually do, like Robert Crumb sort of makes it have roundness, and like Cézanne put blue around fruit, and it drops away, and it sort of fights the flatness, right? And you seem to be intentionally making them flat, like stained glass windows.
Yeah. Well, so that series grew out of the Bitter Seed series, where I was very consciously referencing stained glass windows. So initially, I would do the drawing of the figure in a kind of sepia tone, which was a kind of painting that I was observing in stained glass windows. They would do this kind of like almost
and things.
Yeah. And you would see this kind of monochromatic painting that they must have done directly on the glass, and then flat areas of color, the colored glass, and then the leaded line. And so in the Bitter Seed, I was kind of trying to play within the rules of, well, if this was actually constructed as a stained glass window, would it work? So, and then as I moved into St. Ursula, I kind of kept the style of the stained glass window, but I started to experiment with having washes of the color and having it drip down the sides, and just having the leaded lines there, not really doing what they would do in a stained glass window. So not concerned about structure, but just the look of it, you know.
So as a form of evolution, it so that seems to go to the cutting out the lithographs.
I hadn't really thought of that. But
because you're separating the figure from the ground, and in fact you can actually peek around the standing up cut up things and see some of the ground that would be hidden, which ultimately is what happens with the animation.
Yeah, I hadn't really considered that, but you're right. I guess I have been cutting out figures and separating them from the ground for a while, so there is a nice thread there. That's what I really got excited about when I cut out those lithographs and started to mount them with struts in the three-dimensional space. There was something about the flat figure, but then all of the space around it and the shadows that it would cast, that to me, it was very pleasing. There was something there, the bounce back between flat, but then also on the flat image, you're doing this rendered drawing that's mimicking, that kind of illusionistic perspective where you're trying to suggest that it's three-dimensional, but the fact that I've cut it out and mounted it, you're still being forced to flip back to, no, but it's flat, and then of course with some of the objects in the house, they are, again, paper sculptures, like the bed and
the snakes coming off the bed that look like water. That's lovely.
Yes,
actually.
Yeah. That was that was a lot of fun, because now I'm also creating these 3D objects, and then having it, kind of spill off, and then activating the space between the bed and the floor where the snakes are kind of undulating down onto the floor.
And the house was your first sculpture?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
It's pretty major.
So
it was.
Talk about that departure from 2D to 3D.
That was hard. I think, animation is hard, but I'm not a natural sculptor, and I think there's a lot of stuff in the dollhouse that I managed to cover up with paper that, if you could see it, how it was structurally built, you'd be like, oh, why did you do it that way?
I'm sure all artists have dirty secrets.
Yes, yeah, there's a lot of dirty secrets in that house, but, and it was foam core. I used, I don't think I'll ever build anything with foam core again, although it's light.
It's pretty awful, isn't it? Yeah, it's delicate. Acid-free, I hope.
Well, I don't know if it is. There's a lot of glue in that dollhouse too. Although as much as I could, I did use the acid-free. But there's a lot of glue stick and all sorts of things. But yeah, that was the biggest hurdle for me technically, was just structurally dealing with building something that doesn't look awful, and doing right angles, and building boxes is hard. Actually, it's much like to do something that has nice crisp edges and good folds, and right angles is much harder than most people, I think, realize until they try and do it. The actual building the paper objects, like the furniture and the cutouts, That was easier. That part. It was mainly just the building of the actual dollhouse.
That part would have been fun. The other part was just the big chore to be able so you could do what you wanted to do, right?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, that was the stage, right? But that was a 2-year process. I mean, I started doing the lithographs midway through the first term of grad school. Mm-hmm. I did the bulk of them over the summer, right? Because you don't have classes, but you still have access to the equipment. Mm-hmm. So I worked pretty full time on it. There's 1 or 2 items in there that look like lithographs, but they're actually digital prints because I started running out of time. And lithography takes a long time to do. So there were a few cheats in there. I think part of the bed is actually, I actually drew with a lithographic crayon onto illustration board and scanned it and then printed it on a textured paper in the with the Epson printer in the digital lab. But it didn't fold as well. That was the only thing, is that the paper I printed on with the lithographs was much more malleable. Mm-hmm. The paper that I used with the digital prints was awful to work. It was terrible to cut. Mm-hmm. So I only did it in a couple of places.
And you're using digital printing now for your drawings of Alice?
Yes. So how I do it is I start with a sketch. So I've got my sketchbook and different grades of graphite pencils. I'll do a drawing. I'll stick it on my scanner. I'll scan it. Mm-hmm. I'll clean it up a little bit in Photoshop. Not much, though. And then I will print them out again we have an inkjet that I like, it's got fairly good resolution. And I print it on a somewhat heavier cardstock. Mm-hmm. So it's not bond paper. It's a little bit thicker. And then I hand color them with the just colored pencils. Mm-hmm. And cut them out. And I build, for Alice, I actually make my own joins. So, in the previous film with the octopus, I used brads, like little mini brads.
Mm-hmm. And you can see them. That word was, the brads. Yeah, you can see them.
Mm-hmm. And that's fine. I actually like that you can see that these are paper dolls. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to hide that at all. With Alice, though, I wanted something a little more subtle. So what I do is I actually use an 1/8 of an inch paper punch. And I punch a whole bunch of holes in the same cardstock paper, open up the hole punch, dump them all out, and then use a Q-tip and white glue. And I use an X-Acto knife to pick up a little round circle, and I stack them. I do a little dab of glue, and I literally build a tab. I know, it's painstaking.
Yeah. I love stuff like that. So carry on.
And then I punch the limb that needs to go onto it with the same. And then it doesn't take long for the little tab to dry. Mm-hmm. But then I usually, the limb that I punch, I keep the colored bit of paper and then put it on top so it kind of blends in a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's basically how I do it. And that way I can also have rather than having a brad that you can see from the front, I can do the tab in the back. So for the head, you can't see the tab in the back that it rotates on. And also in the body, because I need them to be able to bend at the waist. So I can also hide them a little bit when I need to. And that was just something I came up with,
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about how your process has informed your thematic structure. Originally, you were dealing with personal mythologies through known mythologies. Now you're working through surrealism, it seems. And is that because you're able to do the multiple in the printing? Did that lead you towards surrealism, or was it?
Well, I think I've always had that. Well, specifically with the animation, when you look at the paper cutout and the history of artists who have used paper cutouts, you invariably come across the Polish animators and the Czech animators, particularly Polish, though, of the 50s and 60s. They were masters of the paper cutout. I don't think that the art form has been further perfected beyond what they were able to achieve. and the kind of work that they tended to produce. And I'm talking about artists like Jan Lenka, and I'm going to mispronounce her name. There's another one, Valerian Borowicz or something, who's also a Polish animator. The work was very surreal. Think about Jan Spankmeyer, right, who's a Czech, who would be a contemporary of these animators. That type of work. Yeah, my cats are running around. So a lot of their work, I don't know, there was something in the water there, but they were very much inspired by that. Of course, a lot of it was very political at the time. These are artists living in Soviet era, Poland, and Czechoslovakia. So I think in part they used the surrealism to sort of embed this subversive or transgressive content, and it would pass the censors. And there's something about the spirit of that. I think I've just always been, work that's sort of transgressive or subversive, I'm always going to be drawn towards it. And I think surrealism, you know, it has elements of that, or it can have elements of that. Also, if you look at the dollhouse, like the bird-headed creatures that exist throughout it are an homage to Max Ernst, and his Lop character, which was an alter ego.
Do you think Alice is your alter ego? Is she your Lop?
She could be. A few close friends of mine whom I've shown the piece to, I get the sense that they're reading that into it, that I'm identifying with Alice. I mean, she's the only female character in it. You know, the other two are male.
Well, hey, I identify with Alice. And
I think we all do, because
and
Alice.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer, for that matter.
Well,
right?
that's true. That's true. So you don't have to it doesn't have to be a gender thing. I think that's why Alice is so popular, because she goes on a journey into Wonderland, which is populated by these kind of absurd, grotesque, charming, but they're all grotesques of a certain kind. And caricatures.
Actually, there's something scary about it. I don't deal well with horror movies, scary stories. I'm too sensitive or something. You know? So, and when I was reading Alice, especially the second one, Through the Looking Glass, and she was in the woods and she was worried 'cause it was getting late.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, oh dear. And then she encounters Tweedledee and Tweedledum, and man, they're creepy. You know,
they are very creepy.
And I had to tell myself, no, this is a children's story.
Yeah.
Bad things are not going to happen. It's okay. You know?
There's definitely...
But there's an edge there.
There is an edge, and I think that's why the scene that I picked, I mean, Tweedledee and Tweedledum they're antagonistic towards her, and you don't know why. But they come with this edge and an attitude. I mean, apparently they come from, like, names Tweedledee and Tweedledum come from a kind of nursery rhyme.
Like Alice would have been thoroughly... she wouldn't have found them scary. They were like these Polish characters from some
exactly.
Or something.
There's something about a rattle or something.
But not for us. Like,
no,
they're like really.
We don't
creepy,
have that,
you know?
and I think that's the thing. I think that's why I'm also compelled towards the Victorian period, because there often was, and particularly in the children's literature, this element of menace. You know, there's this kind of darker. I don't know that the Victorians would have found it dark, but you know, contemporary eyes would look at it and go, oh, okay, that seems to have a bit of an edge to it. But
let's talk about the dollhouse a little bit, because the dollhouse is very, very gothic. It's very grotesque. It's a really rich piece, and it seems to be your most surrealistic up until the Domestika videos, you know. So having a sentient house, you talked about that in your master's thesis. You know, what makes this dollhouse not a regular dollhouse? Yeah.
Well, so what I was investigating with that house was this notion of the Gothic with a capital G. So looking at Gothic literature from the 18th, 19th century, mainly in Britain. And in looking at the Gothic, you bounce up against the term domestic Gothic, which is where domesticia, I put an extra I in there, comes from. And why I'm so driven to Gothic literature is, number one, most of the protagonists are women, and almost entirely most of the settings are domestic. So, and when you look at what are the major themes in Gothic writing, it's usually the family, hidden family secrets, the repressed. There's usually, like if you think of Fall of the House of Usher, you literally have Roderick interring his sister prematurely, as it turns out, in the family crypt. So she's literally underneath the house as the worst of all family secrets, who then comes back as the vengeful ghost, which is another kind of trope of the Gothic. She comes back to claim her vengeance, and the house literally falls apart at the end. And then another example that I wrote about in my thesis was Jane Eyre. So we have another well-known trope in Gothic writing is the mad woman in the attic. So we have Rochester's first wife who's gone insane and is violent, and she's literally chained in the attic and kept under guard, and Jane has no idea, somehow, as a big house, I guess, that this crazy person is chained in the attic. So it's this idea of the veneer of domestic perfection, that everyone's playing by the rules and is mannered and polite, but then what the Gothic is trying to sort of expose is that, like the id, if you want to get Freudian, it's all the dark material that we push down, right? The passions, the violence, that is sort of part of the human condition, but we kind of push it all under. But in the Gothic, it resists that. So ultimately, all of this repressed material bubbles up and it finds expression.
Like snakes pouring out of a bed.
Exactly. I mean, if there was ever a more Freudian bed.
No kidding.
It's
and then they
gotta
go
be
all
that one.
around through the house and everything,
Yes.
and it makes me think like the boudoir has all kinds of desires in it, and they've just moved into every nook and cranny of that house.
Exactly.
That house being a person.
Yeah.
Right?
So whether these things actually exist in the house, or are they the manifestations of the mad woman in the attic, or you know what I mean? It's I imagine it as this kind of fever dream of all of this sort of heavy psychological material that is manifesting itself physically in the bed sheets. I mean, beds are always going to be a site of, there's going to be a lot of psychology there. Yeah. Right? There's going to be passion. Space. It's a loaded, it's never neutral. And there's also humor. I mean, there's two images of me in the dollhouse. So I'm the nanny in the nursery with the screaming bird babies. And then I'm also in the kitchen trying to deal with an overly large egg beater, which is kind of a bit of a joke because I hate cooking. Like, I just hate it.
Well, it looks like a Claes Oldenburg egg beater. It's so huge.
Yes. It's just, and I'm just sort of trying to, come to terms with what am I supposed to do with this.
Yeah. But the break of scale is really important for the surrealistic, voice to be coming forward. And the break of scale is definitely dealt with in response to how Susan Stewart on Longing outlines the scale of the dollhouse and how breaking the scale of the dollhouse. Well, you can talk about what you were doing.
Yeah. So, any dollhouse enthusiast knows that, one of the basic tenets of a dollhouse is scale and the adherence to scale.
Yes.
So, the idea of a traditional dollhouse is to create this little macrocosm of domestic perfection, I suppose, and everything is supposed to reflect reality just at 1/12 scale. And we all look at it and admire the detail that went into the little cups and saucers on the table. But if there's a deviation in scale, it's jarring. It's immediately incongruous because it breaks. It's almost like breaking the fourth wall in a film. It's sort of, we set up these rules and we're supposed to obey them.
I'm trying to suspend my disbelief here, and you ruined it.
Yeah, exactly. And as soon as we have that break in scale, you're like, whoa, that's obviously wrong. And it's so that's what I was trying to play with in the dollhouse. And then when you see the installation that I had set up around the dollhouse itself in the gallery, I took, I actually scanned the lithographs I had created of the bugs that are kind of a theme that runs throughout
Yeah,
the
the
dollhouse,
insects
and
are
scaled them up.
on the wallpaper.
Yes, and they're on the
of
wallpaper.
dollhouse,
Yeah.
and, you know, and then they move into the gallery, and they're much larger in the
Yeah.
gallery.
Yeah.
You know, very, very, very creepily
Yes,
larger.
and they get bigger and bigger as they kind
Yeah.
of expand out. So it's this idea of the world of the dollhouse bleeding into the space of the gallery, and then of course the viewer is now implicated in the scene of the dollhouse now, so that the insects are now roughly the size to you as they would be to the inhabitants of the dollhouse, right? So, and it's a simple thing, playing with scale, but you know, you can just have a lot of fun just making things really big or really small. And again, it's without. I mean, I did reference Alice a little bit in my thesis in talking about the dollhouse, but I hadn't really thought about it in terms of the scale until now. But I mean, that's what Alice goes through, right? Is that kind of she gets
almost
bigger,
ad nauseum in the first book.
Yeah.
Like, big, small,
big, small, you know, and it's this kind of and it's playful, but at the same time, it's absurd, right? And you know, so that's in part what I'm playing with in the dollhouse.
You seem to want to try to make seeing difficult, is one way to put it.
Like obscuring things. So
no, like as with ambiguity, it's this or it's that, or yeah. Well, at risk of quoting Clement Greenberg, he said ambiguity is one of the chief sources of pleasure in art, and I think you like it a lot. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Because you know, you want something that's got legs, as I say to my students a lot of the time. I hate work that's spelled out for me. I want to, you know, present you with something that's interesting, you know, and I'll walk into it. I'm going to come into it with my own baggage and history anyway, and I'll parse it, I'll pull it apart, and it's going to mean this for me, you know, you know, but it's got to be an image that allows that kind of play.
Yeah, it can't be totally resolvable,
no.
right? So otherwise it's not interesting.
No, it isn't. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, who wants something that's resolved, you know? I mean, it's sort of like in a movie, you know, where things are cooking along and you're like, oh, okay, there's something interesting, and then they give you this ending. You're like, oh, really? Why did you do that? You know, kind of thing. It's like, no, I don't want it all resolved. Things are never resolved, you know.
Okay. Just thinking about the dollhouse and the kitchen a little bit more. You've got dead mice as food.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really disgusting.
It is. Yeah. Well, because the logic in my mind in the dollhouse is that the bird-headed ladies are the ladies of the house, so they're the owners of the house. So even though it would be quite a feast, these bird-headed ladies are obviously carnivorous, and they would consume the mice are hanging up as a kind of, I don't know, like ham hock or something like that in the cupboard. And then the human, the one human, which is myself twice, is the servant, right? So, and there I am trying to contend with their brood. There doesn't seem to be a male figure in there, interestingly enough, other than maybe the children. In fact, there are, because one of the bird children, one's definitely a girl, one's definitely a boy, how they're dressed. And then I guess there are larger male doll heads in one of the cabinets, which a number of people have commented looks like my first son.
Yes.
You know, that wasn't conscious. That I literally had gone to the ROM with my sketchbook and had sketched items in their collection. So that was actually just a doll head, like a Victorian era doll head. I think just my son happened to have that cherubic face, or he did at that time. And the bugs also come from, they have that great wall of bugs on the second floor. They're all identified by genus or whatever. And I sat there, and I think one of them is a cicada, and then there's some kind of butterfly, and the other one's like a flying ant of some kind.
Now, winged things in your work. I mean, you've got the butterfly in the videos, and you've got, you know, the butterflies in the installation. What is the attraction to winged things? And then you have the bird women.
Yeah.
You know, is that
Well, I think butterflies just look great in animation. Like it's something, it was the very first thing I ever animated, was that butterfly flap at the beginning. I ended up using it twice. I kind of pulled apart my very first video I did, because it wasn't very good, and used that first bit of footage in the second one. And I think partly just it looks great on film. So I've got a flat 2D thing.
Shadows happening.
Yes.
And it breaks the picture plane.
Exactly. You've got an X and a Y and then a Z as it comes out towards the camera. And to animate it, all I did was I needed wire so that the wings would bend but then hold their position as you shoot it. And I just used twist ties. I just glued twist ties to the back of it. I twisted it into a sort of like this kind of formation, and it worked. Right. So but the butterfly ended up being a motif of mine, because I think that the butterflies are going to come back in the next one.
Oh, okay.
And I look at, and in the Domesticia ones, I think of them as it's a kind of an agent of chaos, right? So everything is working well in the nursery, and the nursery maid is rocking the baby, and the children are playing, and it's all well, and then the butterfly comes in, and then it all falls to shit, right? So it's this kind of disruptor.
Well, it also comes out of the decapitated.
Yes.
That's Madeline, right?
Yeah. She comes out, Madeline.
So that looked like Psyche to me, which is, like...
Kind of, yeah. I think at the time I was thinking of an image in one of my kids' books. It's a book of Greek mythology that shows Pegasus climbing out of the body of Medusa after her head's been severed. Because apparently Pegasus came out of the drops of blood. But literally in this image, it's shown that Pegasus climbed out of her dead body, and I liked that image.
I did not know that. Okay,
yeah, it's a great book of Greek mythology, and it has all of these original lithographs that the son of the authors had done. And
well, speaking of original drawings, Jean Tenniel did the original drawings in Alice, and there seems to be some referencing to that.
In fact, in the image of me holding the bird baby in the chair, there's an image from Tenniel of Alice holding the pig baby, the baby that transforms into a pig. That just always stuck with me. I thought that was a great image. So, but it was really just this idea of holding this swaddled infant that all of a sudden is not an infant, not a human infant anyway. And I just... when I started with the animation, it was specifically that scene in the dollhouse I really wanted to see move. And it was that idea of actually hearing now the sound that all of those open mouths would make. I had to simplify it because I couldn't animate all of those babies over. I'd have to multi-plane it to do it as an animation. So I just had two and then the infant.
But the audio is pretty overwhelming.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to turn it down.
I know.
I was putting my blood pressure up.
I actually had it in an installation. I feel so sorry for the people who sat in the gallery, because they had it at Center 3. I had the last two videos on a loop in there, and yeah, I told them after a while, you can put headphones on the TV so that people don't have to listen to, because I think for the first day they literally had that on the loop with the screaming.
Wow.
Yeah.
That would be like the baby that's just never going to be soothed.
Exactly.
Just unsoothable.
I think like every 5 minutes or so we had to hear that.
No, the cello was nice. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, and you worked with Zev Farber?
Yeah, Zev Farber did the soundtrack in the Petite Mort one. So previous to that, I had just bought royalty-free music off of various websites, which is great, but it really frees things up when you can just animate to, like, your pacing is basically how you think the scene should be paced, and then you get somebody to actually do the music to your animation, rather than when you start with the music, you always have to, the music dictates the timing, and that is pretty restricting. So, so Zev is a colleague of mine that we met at York in grad school. Very talented multimedia artist, and also does a lot of composing of music for those of us who do time-based, because his background is actually in music. And so I just handed my finished footage to him for the last one and said, here's my notes, here's what I'm thinking, surprise me. And I remember it came back and it wasn't at all what I was playing in my head. And I played it through a few times and I'm like, this is actually way better than anything I could have imagined. Like, I think he nailed it. Yeah. He really nailed it. And he got that kind of Asian flavor, that kind of feel, that surrealistic feel. It's a little electronic, but it's also very traditional in the kind of the sounds he produces. So it was, I think, the right note.
Okay. I'm just returning to the babies in the nursery. Now, you're the nanny in that, but motherhood has played out a lot in your previous work. Yeah. So, do you want to talk about your graded drawings or the departure point for your alphabet of anxieties? You know, I mean, motherhood keeps surfacing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's back to the autobiographical content that had fueled all of my art practice, really up until recently, and probably is still a component. So, you know, I started Gravid in 2004 at a time that I decided that, you know, we would try and have a family. And, you know, as with a lot of, you know, my art colleagues, women artists specifically, there's always a little bit of anxiety or a lot of anxiety about starting a family because, of course, here you are being an artist, something that, you know, any kind of creative practice requires a lot of time, not very much money coming back in. So there's this anxiety that you're going to trade career for motherhood, and I think that plays out to a degree in Gravid, that kind of anxiety about, well, is this really something I want to do? Even though really at that point in time I made up my mind, but there was a lot of ambiguity and ambivalence. And I continued that series after, like while I was pregnant and then afterwards. And I think the last image I did was me breastfeeding my oldest. And he would have been a year and a half. He was over.
But you've
1.
got streaks in your hair there, your color streaks.
I did. I really did. Actually.
Very attitude-y, you know, mother image. Yeah. It's good.
I think that was a response, and I really did have hot pink streaks in my hair at the time. I think it was that, you know, walking around pushing a stroller in this neighborhood, going to the parks with the other moms, and not wanting to lose what you identify as yourself in this kind of mommy land, right? So I was determined to not look like all the other beach moms and be this kind of like, I don't know, arty Queen Rest kind of mom, and you know, it's all well and good, and you know, then the alphabet started. I began work on it when Ridley was about a year and a half, and I wasn't yet pregnant with my second son, and I was going to do it as a series of prints, but then abandoned the idea shortly thereafter starting working on it because then I became pregnant, and I didn't want to do. And at that time I was doing etching, and you know, working with solvents is part of working. I mean, traditionally with etching, I mean, there is non-toxic materials you can use, but I just decided to forego printmaking and any kind of possible exposure to toxic chemicals while I was pregnant. And I thought, well, I'll just do them as drawings. I can still do it. I'll just do them as colored pencil drawings. And that worked well. And I think actually worked better for the series ultimately because of the content, because I was very much riffing off of a child's book. The fact that they're done in basically pencil crayon makes a lot of sense, right? So, and also just logistically, it was something that I could do for an hour or an hour and a half while somebody was having a nap, right? I would just go in my basement, I had my drawing table, I could just pick up a pencil and start working. There was a lot of setup. And then if I had to stop, I didn't have to worry about painting, like cleaning out paint from a brush or anything like that. I could just stop.
Something 3/4 done, and then the paint's going to dry if you leave.
Yeah, exactly.
That's scary.
So the setup.
Start. No.
Yeah, you know. So sometimes just the the fact of what's going on in your life dictates what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, was a good case in point. But I think the series, I think it worked, it worked well anyway,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then I did the bulk of it. I think I had 24 or 23 or 24 of the 26 letters of the alphabet done before I went to York. So that would have been 2008. And that's why the series looks like it took so long to do, because I started it it was 2006. It looks like it took 4 years. It was 2006 to 2010, but most of it was done in the 2 years, 2006 to 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got in grad school and was doing work for that, and I think it was during the strike at York when I was there. I managed to finish at least one or two more, and I finished Zed, which was I didn't do them all in order, but Zed just happened to be the last one I did, and I finished it the summer after I graduated from
Mm-hmm.
school. And at that time, I had no energy left for the series at all. I was so over it,
Mm-hmm.
but I had spent so much time doing it, so
Yeah.
there was no way I wasn't going to finish it. So I finished the alphabet with my images of my two sons, because
Mm-hmm.
Nigel hadn't actually been in any of the previous images, so
Oh, really?
because
Yeah.
he wasn't born for
exist,
most of
yeah.
it, and then it's hard to pose really small newborns.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do much with them.
Mm-hmm.
They
So-
fall over.
Yeah, they do, So I had to, so I think he was about 18 months or so in that image.
Okay. But then that did become a print-on-demand book, so it actually did get printed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It would be nice to actually do an actual run of books, but it's just publishing.
Good luck finding a publisher. 'Cause
Well, that's
it's
the thing.
color.
Yeah.
And would probably want coated paper, and it's
Yeah.
going to be expensive. Right?
Yeah,
So-
that's the thing, is it's just I can't, and I haven't really shopped it around exhaustively. I've just sort of sent some half-hearted, books to publishers, and just the industry itself, I think, is going through so much, that unless I was this big name artist, I don't see that you could really pitch a 40-page, mostly color book.
Yeah, that actually is not a children's book, even though it looks like one.
Yeah,
It's,
exactly.
Plus, where would you shelve it? In the store and everything.
I think there's lots of logistical issues. So, it exists as a print on demand still,
Mhm.
and it is out there. I don't know. Maybe one day I'll actually do a run and have an inventory. It's just a matter of once I had an inventory, I've got all the books here. Where am I going to put them?
Yes.
How am I going to distribute them?
Well, tell me about it.
Yeah.
Magazine. I have cartons of back issues.
That's the thing, So you just don't.
Yeah.
So at least with print on demand, you don't have to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think I could produce it cheaper per unit cost, not doing print on
yes.
demand,
Yeah.
but then you're saddled with inventory. So, and I don't, distribution is an issue
Mm-hmm.
with books in general. So it exists in an ebook form. A few people have actually purchased it that way. I don't know that it makes sense as an ebook, to be honest. I mean, I could see maybe if it was interactive. I don't know that I would look at a book that was mostly illustrations in an ebook form, but it does exist that way.
Mhm.
At least it's cheap.
Maybe. I'd read comics like that. I don't have a problem with that.
Okay. Well, I mean, maybe it's just I haven't embraced that idea yet, but it does exist. But I it's done. I finished it. It made sense for me to work on that series at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It had, I set up the ground rules, alphabet, each letter of the alphabet. I literally got a big piece of paper and I brainstormed what my response was going to be to each letter based on anxieties, desires. So it was a very personal
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
What's the hardest letter? And that's a really difficult question. I know what I just had to ask.
You was hard. Z, you would think X would be, but then I had xenophobia.
Yes,
And it was very
yes.
topical at the time with women debating whether women should wear the hijab, not wear the hijab. So that one was actually easier, but I found U was hard. And I think I came up with uniformity, and it was sort of like, it's okay. But there's a lot of unwords, I guess. But there was nothing, a few of them were, some worked better than others. I always thought...
unctuousness. And I just came up with W, I guess I had war.
Yeah, some were easier than others. Some just,
Yeah, I'm sure.
they just, the word comes up and you're like, oh yeah, that's it. And others were a little bit more of a challenge. And then the other challenge was with each letter, I acted it out in a way. So you can see I'm a character. I'm almost in every single drawing. And I've got the same dress on, I think, for the most part. There may be one or two departures.
Did you double yourself?
In a few of them, yeah.
Yes.
I had, I actually worked from photographs. So I'd had Richard, I'd pose, he'd shoot me. I would do a composite in Photoshop. I would print it out and I would draw from that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
why were you doubling yourself?
Well, I mean, in a couple of them, I suppose it's looking at oneself literally in the same frame. In that one, so in one it's obesity. So I have myself as I was then, which is relatively thin, and then I imagine myself as being quite overweight. I know myself. I've struggled with body issues. Women in general, people in general, I guess, struggle with body image, and that's really all that piece was about, that particular image. But and then with the pollution one, I was thinking in terms of becoming this mutation. Right? So I was this kind of conjoined twin creature. Although as a instructor at York, when he looked at the piece, he commented that he was fascinated by it because he couldn't really, when you looked at the anatomy of the conjoined twin that it created, you couldn't really quite figure out what was going on with the legs and how it all joined, because it kind of makes sense up here with the two-headed, but then down here some weird thing happened, and I had 3 legs, and you were trying to figure out where all the legs actually joined. But that's what I liked about it, is it's a weirdly ambiguous image, because you're like, I don't know that I can understand the anatomy of this, but I think that idea of the freak, and that's why that one in particular is one of my favorites in my book, is, and that's almost even getting back to the dollhouse, is that idea of the grotesque, the freakish, the hybrid, like the bird ladies. I mean, it's these kind of somewhat monstrous hybrids, and yet at the same time, monsters are always sad. I mean, they're kind of they elicit pathos from us, because we, much like you would, if you saw somebody who was disfigured or looked different, even though, there's a kind of, there is a reaction to that. It's like, oh, that must be hard to be like that, and then, and maybe it's even back to an anxiety about disfigurement, or difference, or, and I think that's just a theme that, again, is sort of bubbled up from previous work. So that one in particular, I like.
Cool. I have one, maybe the last question, I don't know. Your blog, why are you Lady Lazarus?
Yeah, I started that in 2010 as just something to do while I was looking for a job. And I picked the name Lady Lazarus because it comes from my favorite Sylvia Plath poem.
Oh,
so
okay.
she has, there's a collection of her poems called Ariel, which is quite well known. And that's her one of her most angry, I think, poems, where she called, and I think in that one she's actually referencing her several suicide attempts. So she's Lady Lazarus, so she just keeps coming back from the dead, right? And I like that image, and then the rest of the blog is Lady Lazarus, dying is an art. So a lot of what I blog about, other than horror films, is also art that is similarly investigating the macabre, the grotesque, the erotic grotesque comes up, the gothic comes up a lot. So a lot of what I write about, though it's not always about art per se, it's often about cultural artifacts that dance around those same concepts. So there is, and I do have my artwork up on the blog. It didn't start off as, I actually had a separate website, and then I just collapsed the two. And it made sense that these are the things that I'm passionate about, that I think about, to have them next door to what I produce as a response to the things that I'm thinking about. So, so that I just literally took that name. I mean, I don't use the name anywhere other than the blog. but I guess because Sylvia Plath, particularly in my younger days, was such an influence on me in terms of her sort of passion. She wouldn't identify as a feminist, but I do, and there's a lot of what she wrote about felt very feminist, whether she agreed or not, and that particular image, particularly the dying is an art, right? Because in the poem itself, she says dying is an art, and don't quote me here, but it's like, and like other things, I do it exceptionally well, right? And also because I write about horror a lot, it's this idea of rebirth, but also coming back from the dead. In the poem, she also writes about the crowd gathering around her, like she's this kind of circus performer coming back from the dead, and they're coming up and poking her body and observing the linen of her shroud and her sort of desiccated corpse body. And so there's this notion of spectacle and a kind of almost horror show spectacle. And it just there's a lot of that in her language in that poem that I really latch onto.
The doting Thomist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's that same idea. In fact, she references that clearly in her. And she in that poem as well, she references one of her suicide attempts, I think when she was 9 or 10, and she talks about how she slammed shut like a clam, and they knocked and knocked to get her out, and that they were picking off the maggots like sticky pearls or something. And it's that maggot and then sticky pearls, and it's that's that idea of the aesthetic, something that's beautiful, and then something repellent, and that's really what I've danced around in terms of my themes over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for having us here today.
Well, thank you.
This has been a really lovely conversation.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Me too.